The wind cut through the pines like a whisper of old ghosts. Somewhere out in the dark, a wolf howled, not the cry of a hunter, but of something lost. Snowflakes drifted down like falling ash over the ridges of the Wyoming Territory. On the porch of a weather-beaten cabin, a lantern swayed gently in the breeze, casting long shadows across the snow. Inside, Wade Callahan stared into the fire with the kind of stillness that only comes from years of silence. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a tin cup, his hand trembling slightly as he raised it. On the table beside him lay a bundle of yellowed letters bound by leather cord, letters he hadn't opened in years, because he already knew what they said. The fire cracked, and the wind moaned through the chinks in the log wall. Wade drank, closed his eyes, and waited for a dawn. He didn't care much to see. Gunfire snapped him awake. It came from somewhere out near the South Trail, near the ridge by Dead Mule Creek. Wade stood fast, instinct cutting through the fog of whiskey. He grabbed his coat, slung his Winchester over one shoulder, and whistled sharply. His old horse? Boone pawed at the snow and came forward from the lean-to. Within minutes, Wade was riding hard through the cold, breath steaming from both man and beast. The sound of the shots had stopped, but smoke lingered in the sky, thin and gray like a warning. What he found made his stomach twist. A wagon lay, turned on its side near the frozen creek bed, one wheel splintered, the canvas soaked in blood. Bada's 2 men lay beside it, shot through the chest. And inside, barely breathing, was a third, a bearded man with gray in his hair and blood pooling at his ribs. Wade leapt down. "Cliff?" he muttered. The man's eyes fluttered open. "Knew you'd come." Wade crouched low. "Hold still, your gut shot bad?" "I'll get you help." "No, listen, no time." Cliff's voice was wet, rattling. He reached up with a blood-slick hand and grabbed Wade's coat. "You promised, damn it. You said, if it ever came to this." "What are you talking about?" "Her name's Nora," Cliff gasped. "She's yours now." "You promised to look after her." "You said," he coughed violently, blood on his lips. "She's in the wagon." Then his eyes glazed. One last breath shuddered out of him, and his grip fell limp. Wade sat there in the snow for a long minute, the wind whipping around him. He didn't move. He didn't swear. He just looked toward the wagon. There was movement under the canvas tarp. He stood and approached slowly, rifle lowered. Pulling the flap aside, he saw her, curled up in a nest of furs, clutching a rifle too large for her frame. Her eyes locked onto his instantly, not wide with fear, not tearful. "Just cold, suspicious, and exhausted, you Nora?" he asked. She didn't answer. "I'm Wade Callahan. Cliff, he's gone." Still nothing. "Just that steel-eyed stare?" "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said. "But it's cold and you're bleeding from somewhere?" Her lip was cracked, her cheek bruised. She clutched the rifle tighter. "Suit yourself," he muttered, tossing a blanket in toward her. She didn't take it. So he leaned in and carefully, as he could, reached an arm beneath her knees and another behind her back. She flinched, then let him lift her. She weighed nothing. He settled her onto Boone, swung up behind and turned back toward the cabin, snow falling harder now, like the land wanted to bury the trail behind them. They didn't speak on the ride. Back, Nora leaned forward, silent and stiff, the rifle still in her hands. Wade could feel her tension, not fear exactly, but something harder, like she was made of wires pulled too tight. When they arrived, Wade dismounted and reached to help her down. She slid off herself and stumbled, but didn't ask for help. She looked around, the cabin, the hills, the loneliness of it all, then turned her back. "You can have the barn," Wade said. "It's warm. I'll fix up a cot." Still no words from her. Just that quiet defiance. Inside the barn, Wade spread hay in the corner and laid an old army blanket over it. He handed her a lantern, which she took without looking at him. Then she sat. Wade stood there a moment longer, then left her to it. Back inside the house, he stared at the fire again. The letters on the table caught his eye. He brushed them aside, then poured another drink. Nora didn't choose this. And neither did he. He walked outside, the cold slapping him sober, and looked toward the barn. Her silhouette passed by the lantern light behind the boards. She was someone else's promise. And now she was his burden, he remembered the last time. He'd lit that cot in the barn for Mary when she was sick, before the typhoid took her and their boy. The grave markers still stood behind the shed. Worn by wind and forgotten by all but him, Wade closed his eyes, the glass still in his. Hen. Somewhere in the barn, Nora coughed. A rough sound like someone unused to letting anything out. He turned back toward the cabin, the door creaking shut behind him. And in the deep cold of that Wyoming night, two souls, one bruised by grief, one beaten by life, slept 100 feet apart under the same stars, with nothing between them but silence, snow, and the echo of a dying man's last request. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm neither of them spoke aloud. Mornings came bitter and early. The sky hung low and gray, the snow crusted hard over the land, but Nora never stayed inside. Before Wade even lit the stove, he'd see her bundled in that same worn coat, feeding chickens, breaking ice in the trough with a rusted shovel, hammering loose shingles back onto the barn's roof. She moved like someone trying not to think. Wade watched her from the porch, his coffee steaming in his hands. He never offered help, and she never asked. She swung the axe with clean, practiced strokes, splitting logs clean in two. When the blade jammed, she'd curse under her breath in Irish. Wade caught it once and almost smiled. They barely spoke, only when necessary. More feeds in the shed. Chickens are laying light. Storm's coming. She answered in short nods or curt replies, never looking him full in the face. But Wade noticed how she walked, stiff in the mornings from sleeping on hay, how she rubbed her wrists sometimes like it still ached from old bruises. He saw the way she checked behind her shoulder when she thought he wasn't looking. She didn't act like someone rescued. She acted like someone who'd never been given a choice. When the storm finally hit, it did so without warning. One moment the horizon was calm. The next, snow swirled sideways, screaming across the flats. Wade found Nora trying to brace the barn doors. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the cabin. You'll freeze. I've slept colder, she said, teeth clenched. Not tonight. Inside, the cabin creaked and groaned with the wind. Snow forced its way through cracks in the window frame. Wade stoked the fire higher and tossed a blanket to Nora. She sat stiffly near the hearth, arms folded, legs tucked beneath her skirt. Neither spoke for a long while. Then, from outside, a crash. Then another. A shrill cry. Wade was on his feet in a blink, rifle in hand. Nora followed, grabbing the lantern. He kicked the door open and stepped into the whiteout, the goat pen. One of the goats shrieked again, and Wade fired blindly into the dark. Something massive thrashed against the fence. Another shot, a roar, then silence by the time Wade reached. The pen, the intruder, a bear, judging by the deep claw marks, was gone. One goat lay dead, another limped in circles. Wade turned to leave and felt it then, a sharp sting down his left arm. Blood. The beast had clipped him. Back inside. Nora ripped open his coat. He hissed. You're lucky it wasn't deeper, she said, pulling off her shawl to stop the bleeding. You a nurse now? He muttered. Something like that. She tied the makeshift bandage tight, then leaned back and looked him over. A smirk twitched at the corner of her mouth. Didn't think a bird scare you, cowboy? Wade gave a dry chuckle. Didn't think you'd be patching me up? Don't get used to it. The next morning, the world looked untouched, clean, bright, but something was wrong. Wade stepped out to check the fence line and froze near the north tree. Etched deep into the bark, crude and jagged, were the words, We know you got the girl. Wade stared for a long moment, jaw tightening. The snow around the tree was churned, boot tracks circling the trunk. He scanned the ridge. Nothing but trees. Stillness. Back at the cabin, he began checking the locks, reinforcing the windows with boards. Loading more shells into the rifle, Nora watched from the table, her eyes narrowed. You expecting someone? Always am. She nodded toward the gun on the table. You ever kill a man up close? Wade looked at her, not angry. Not cold, just tired. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Later that evening, while Wade split wood and Nora boiled snow water, she paused mid-pour and squinted toward the tree. Line, something moved. Wade turned, following her gaze. Nothing but woods and fading light, then he saw it, a shadow. Human-shaped, tall, still as stone. Wade's heart jumped. He stepped forward. The figure vanished behind the pines. Nora moved toward the fence. "You know him?" Wade nodded slowly. "Maybe." That night, just before the snow came again, they found a rabbit, skinned and cleaned, hanging from the fence. Close by the barn. A gift. Wade stared at it a long time before taking it down. "Friend of yours?" Nora asked. "Name's Tall Elk," Wade said. "Lakota. Saved my life back in Montana Territory. Took an arrow to do it. You think he's still saving?" "It? Reckon so?" Nora looked toward the woods again, thoughtful, then said, "Guardian ghost." Wade didn't laugh. But for the first time since she arrived, he didn't feel quite so alone, and though they still slept in separate places, when the fire crackled that night and the wind howled again, there was something different in the quiet between them. Something warmer than before, not trust. Not yet, but the fire had been lit. Wade bolted upright at the sound of a scream, sharp, guttural, and close. His rifle was already in his hands before he'd shaken the sleep from his eyes. The window beside his cot exploded inward with a crack of splintered glass. A shadow darted past. Another scream, Nora's voice, echoed from the barn. He threw open the cabin door and saw 3 men moving like wolves in the half-light of dawn. They wore filthy Union jackets, blue now faded to ash, each armed with rusted pistols and knives. One had Nora by the arm, dragging her from the barn. She kicked and thrashed, spitting curses, her hair wild. Another man turned just in time to see Wade's rifle rise. The shot rang out and hit him square in the chest. He dropped, lifeless, the remaining 2 scattered. One dove behind the well. The other shoved Nora to the ground and fired toward Wade, the bullet whizzing past his ear. Wade ducked behind the porch post, exhaled, and fired again, missed. A return shot struck his thigh. Hot, sharp pain ripped through his leg. He dropped to one knee. "Wade." Nora screamed. He gritted his teeth and stood, blood soaking through his pants. From the corner of his eye, he saw Nora scramble to her feet and run toward the barn, then reappear gripping the pitchfork. "Ez?" The bandit nearest her rose to shoot again. She drove it hard into his side. The third man, the last, saw the tide turning and fled toward the trees, vanishing into the pines like smoke. Wade raised his rifle to fire, but his vision blurred. His leg buckled. He dropped to the dirt. Nora ran to him. "Don't you dare quit now," she barked, pressing a cloth to the wound with shaking hands. The barn door flapped open in the wind. A lantern had spilled, flames licking up the dry hay. Smoke curled fast into the air. "Wade, the barn." He tried to stand. The pain blinded him. "Leave it," he growled. "But the horse—" "Leave it!" Nora helped him up, ducking. Under his arm. They hobbled together toward the woods, smoke chasing them. The barn groaned behind them, then erupted in a roar of orange. The heat followed them like breath from hell itself. They didn't look back. Their only horse was gone. Their food, their tools, their winter stores, gone. But they had each other, and a rifle, and whatever strength hadn't been burned away, they vanished into the trees just as the roof collapsed. For 2 days they moved through the forest. Wade could barely walk, leaning heavy on Nora's shoulders. She said little, but every hour she stopped to set simple snares, gather pine needles, or smear moss and crushed root against his wound. They made camp beneath a low-hanging fir. Snow gathered on its branches like feathers. Wade lay on a bed of dry needles, shivering while Nora knelt beside him, boiling bark in a tin cup over a small fire. "You know herbs?" he croaked. "My mother did. I watched. Didn't think I'd ever need it." Wade stared up at the canopy above them. "You saved my damn life." Nora didn't respond at first. Then softly, "You saved mine first, out there with Cliff." He turned his head toward her. "He said you were his wife." She poked at the fire. "He bought me from my uncle, said it was better than starving." She gave a bitter laugh. Maybe it was. Wade swallowed hard. I'm sorry. She shook her head. Don't be. I've made peace with it. But don't think I came to you by choice. I didn't choose any of this. Wade nodded, silent for a moment. I had a son, 7 years old. Typhoid got him. My wife soon after. I buried them behind the barn. The fire crackled between them. For the first time, their pain felt like shared language. Nora reached across the space and rested her hand. On his chest, light but firm. We're not the same. But maybe we're not strangers anymore. That night, the fever came hard. Wade drifted in and out of dreams, flames licking up through the floorboards. His boy calling out, Nora's face blurring into Mary's. He felt the world tilt. Somewhere he heard Nora calling for help, and then footsteps. Tall Elk appeared in the moonlight like a ghost carved from the trees. His dark eyes studied them both. Then without a word he knelt, lifted Wade over his shoulder like he weighed nothing, and led Nora deeper into the forest. They reached a narrow gap between cliffs, hidden behind pine. Inside, a cave breathed, warm with trapped heat and the scent of smoke. A small fire already burned in the center. Animal hides lined the stone floor. Someone had lived here, perhaps Tall Elk himself. He laid Wade gently on the furs, then handed Nora a pouch of herbs and flint. Still, he said nothing. Just gave her a look, calm, knowing, then disappeared back into the dark. Wade slept, like a man near death. Nora stayed by his side the entire night, pressing cool claws to his forehead, changing his bandages, whispering things she wasn't even sure he heard. When his breathing slowed and his eyes fluttered half open, her hand found his rough, calloused, familiar now. She didn't let go. Exact word count. 1,000 words. The days in the cave passed like slow-moving smoke, quiet, curling and warm in places that had once felt cold. Wade lay on a bed of pine and fur, his leg bandaged with softened hide, the fever behind him now. The fire crackled low. Nora moved gently around him, tending to herbs, boiling snow, patching her torn shawl. She hummed sometimes soft Irish lullabies he'd never heard, but somehow felt like memories he'd forgotten. Tall Elk came and went without warning. He showed Nora how to find rabbit trails, how to mark trees with tiny cuts to find her way back. She learned quickly, watching with sharp eyes and never once asking the same question twice. Wade, still too sore to walk far, watched her from the cave mouth, leaning on a crutch Tall Elk carved for him. One afternoon, Nora returned from the creek with a string of fish, her hair damp and wild. She laughed, something full, unguarded as. She tried to explain how she slipped on ice and nearly landed, face first in the water. Wade blinked in surprise. You're laughing, he said. She glanced at him, then shrugged. Guess I forgot how. He smiled back but didn't say another word. That night they shared the fish over the fire. Tall Elk carved a small animal figure from bone, silent, focused like he wasn't carving but remembering something. Wade and Nora watched in silence. No one called it a family, but there was warmth between them, something that didn't need naming. By the end of the week, Wade could walk with the crutch. Nora had stopped glancing behind her shoulder. They were breathing again. Not just surviving, but breathing. But the smoke hadn't cleared completely. It was dusk when they heard the branches snap. Wade stood, hand on his rifle. Tall Elk was already outside, crouched in the snow like a panther. A single figure came, stumbling through the trees, a bandit, coat torn, eyes wild with rage and bloodlust. The last one. He raised his pistol. Tall Elk didn't flinch. His bow came up like water rising. The arrow flew fast and clean, catching the man just beneath the collarbone. He dropped, howling. Wade stepped forward, pain flaring in his leg. He raised the rifle, leveled it at the bandit's chest. The man opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to curse. Wade fired. Silence fell. The smoke drifted again, heavier this time. Nora walked out slowly. She looked at the body, then at Wade. She said nothing. Instead, she grabbed the shovel leaning against the pine and started digging. An hour later, the hole was done. She dragged the corpse in by its boots and shoveled the dirt back over with steady arms. When she was finished, She wiped the back of her hand across her mouth and turned to Wade. "I'm not sorry," she said. He shook his head. "Neither am I." That night the storm returned, blanketing the mountain with fresh snow, but inside the cave it was warm. The fire burned steady. Wade fell asleep with Nora's head resting on his chest, their fingers laced together beneath the blanket. And for the first time in years he dreamed of something other than loss. Spring came late, but it came. The snow melted in rivers across the slopes. Buds pushed through the thawed dirt. Birds returned, singing like they'd never known winter. Wade stood at the ridge, the crutch gone now. The wind tugged gently at his coat. Beside him, Nora traced a line in the soil with a stick. "It's time," he said. "We can go to town. I can get you a train east." She looked up. "I can help you start over. You don't owe me anything." She didn't answer right away. Then she stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, and met his gaze. "I ain't got nowhere to go, and no one waiting." She took a breath. "But if you'd let me, I'd stay, help rebuild what you lost." Wade looked at her, long and quiet. He didn't speak, just turned, walked back to the burned land that once was his ranch, and set a tin mug on the half-sawn fence post. Then he picked up a hammer and began to mend it. Nora followed without another word. The sky was clear that day, and in the weeks that followed, the land began to breathe again. Smoke no longer rose from the barn ruins, but from a small chimney rebuilt stone by stone. Nora hung clean sheets on a line between two trees, her hand steady, her smile soft. Wade sat on the porch, knife in hand, carving a piece of wood into something shapeless, but coming alive slowly. Maybe a horse, maybe a bird. Tall elk rode past the edge of the ridge, stopped once, and lifted his hand. Wade lifted his back. No words. Then the Lakota man turned and vanished into the trees. The ranch was still broken, and the past still hung in the corners of their hearts like smoke that refused to leave, but something had been planted, and with time, it would grow. Voiceover. Some things we don't choose, but maybe they're given for a reason. Like fire, it burns, but it clears the way for something new. If this story stirred something in you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if a stranger gave you a life you never asked for? Would you run or rebuild?